The last Israeli captive's body found in Gaza, where many thousands of Palestinians lie buried under the rubble. And Israel, as part of its long-standing policy, has not returned the remains of many hundreds of Palestinians. Why? And what's the impact? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. A moment of closure for many in Israel, the remains of the last Israeli captive from the October the 7th attacks finally coming home. After an exhaustive search with huge resources, the family of police officer Gvili can finally begin to mourn. But for Palestinians in Gaza, that day may never come, with thousands of their loved ones lying beneath mountains of rubble. Finding and identifying them is a mammoth task as Israel continues to block the excavation machinery and scientific equipment that's needed. Beyond Gaza, withholding the remains of Palestinians from their families has been an Israeli policy for many years, backed in the last decade by the country's Supreme Court. Palestinians say the dead are held hostage, along with thousands of prisoners living in brutal conditions in Israeli jails. So how have such policies in place for years come about? What's driving them? And what's the impact on Palestinians? We'll discuss this with our guest shortly. But first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
The remains of the last Israeli captive held in Gaza have been found and returned to his family. The body of police officer Gvili was discovered in a cemetery near Gaza City. Teams have been searching for his remains since the ceasefire with Hamas began in October. Heavy machinery, forensic experts, and 20 dentists concentrated on the cemetery before they confirmed his recovery. The Israeli military says to find that one body, it had to test 250 others first. Because Gaza is a mass grave. Under the tens of millions of tons of debris are an estimated 10,000 Palestinian bodies. Palestinians have spent months desperately searching for the remains of their missing relatives. But for those efforts, Israel is still blocking heavy machinery and DNA testing tools from coming into the Strip. Gaza's civil defense teams are forced to use shovels, pickaxes, and their bare hands. And remains that are found are incredibly difficult to identify. Years of Israeli bombardment have destroyed Gaza's forensic laboratories, leaving no equipment, no DNA testing, and no refrigeration.
The world must recognise the sensitivity and gravity of this matter and work to provide labs for DNA testing, or at least allow the existing samples from Gaza to be examined abroad. That way their identities can finally be known. We are talking about thousands of cases.
Beyond Gaza, Israel is believed to be withholding the bodies of more than 1,000 Palestinians, including women and children and prisoners who have died while in Israeli custody. Rights groups say they're kept in refrigerators and cemeteries marked with numbers, not names. Of the Palestinian bodies returned to Gaza as part of the ceasefire deal, most were unidentified, some showing signs of torture and execution.
I came to identify my son's body, but the images were unclear, the features disfigured. We couldn't tell who was who. The bodies were mixed together.
At least 9,000 Palestinian prisoners are still being held in Israeli jails, the majority held under administrative detention, without charge or trial. And rights groups warn they're nothing more than torture camps, sites of systematic abuse and continued deaths. The pain of relatives of those held in Israel, alive or dead, another weapon in the war against Palestinians. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, we have the right guests to discuss this today. Joining us, Amjad Shawa is the director of the Palestinian Non-Governmental Organizations Network. He joins us from Gaza City. Yara Hawari is co-director at Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. Today she's in Paphos, Cyprus. And Issam Aruri is Commissioner General of the Independent Commission for Human Rights in Palestine. He joins us from Ramallah. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Let me start with you, Amjad, because you are there in Gaza City. Let me read you the quote. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we promised and I promised to bring everyone back. We brought them all back. After 843 days, all the Israelis killed or taken captive have been accounted for. What was your reaction and the reaction of people around you in Gaza City when you heard this news?
Thank you, James. And it's not only my reaction, it's the reaction of the mothers who are still waiting to reach the bodies of their children, the families, also the infants that they lost both parents and the entire families, and now waiting in order to collect the bodies of about 10,000 bodies under the rubbles of the Gaza Strip. Also in the cemetery that the Israel digged and search and get out the bodies of more than 200 Palestinians. And we have no idea how they get them back or buried them back on their graves. Also, we have about 750 Palestinians who killed while they are in the prisons, in the Israeli detention, and they are captured. There is other thousands who are missing, and we have no information about them. So if you can ask almost all the Palestinians about their feelings toward these moments, while the Israel is all released and still our dead bodies unknown. And already 60% of the Gaza Strip under the Israeli total control, that we have no access. And almost every day we are collecting some bones, skulls from the different areas, and we cannot identify them while the mothers are waiting. It's very critical moments that if they are passing through. I met a mother, her tent is just beside a mountain of rubble. And when I asked her, why you don't go to one of the sites, one of the camps, why you're staying alone here? She said, I'm staying beside my beloved ones, beside my children, their bodies, that we have no machinery, no equipment in order to get them out from the rubbles. It's mixed, but it's also at the same time, it's painful times that every day we are passing through till we manage to get these bodies back and to bury them in dignified way.
OK, let me bring in Issam in Ramallah. You heard Amjad there talk about 10,000 people under the rubble. But the truth is we don't actually know the exact figure. We don't know how many people were killed in the war in Gaza. The official figure is over 71,000 from the Ministry of Health, but many estimates say it could be greater than that. And if we don't know the total figure, I guess we don't really know the exact number that are missing under the rubble. Is that correct?
First of all, I just like to make it clear that keeping the bodies and the denial of the dignified burial of Palestinian victims is not limited to Gaza and did not start on the 7th of October. According to the records of the National Campaign for the Retrieval of Palestinian and Arab war victims' bodies, documented so far the 776 cases of those who were denied the right of burial. Many of them are for decades now. This policy started directly after the occupation in 1967, and there were times when there was the policy was clear. Other times the policy was not clear about this issue. Among the bodies that the campaign is documenting now, there are 77 children, 10 women, and 96 people who died in prisons. That doesn't include thousands of missing people in Gaza whose fate is not known for their families or for the Palestinian community, whether they are dead or alive, whether they are prisoners or they are in some refrigerators. And Israel never gave any information or allowed the ICRC as a deposit of the Geneva Conventions to check on these bodies or to meet the prisoners there. That's why we see that we are living a historical moment, that it is time to open this file. We talk about it. When I talk about that, I have a mixed feeling of anger and sadness, because the body of one Israeli was raised in the international community, while the fate of thousands of Palestinians is not being mentioned, even as if human dignity has a religion, has a race, has a color. We believe that each human being has the right of dignified burial. That's a very basic human right, and we ask that Palestinians are dealt with equally with all other people, including the Israelis. While we feel that the use of their bodies as bargaining chips, it is something like trading or like human trafficking. When you want a price to give back the body of a dead person, regardless of the circumstances of that death, it is something that the international community have to be in line with the international standards towards all, justice for all and dignity for all. That's what we demand, and we see that even we have a compile of Israeli courts rulings that allowed in 2019 to keep the bodies as a bargaining chips, but now since there are no bodies to bargain for, there are no prisoners, there is no Israeli prisoners. All those who were kept for bargaining should be released without any delay.
Issam, I would like to come to some of the historical aspects of this a little later in our discussion. But Yara, while we're focusing on the dead and people in captivity, I think you perhaps can give us some context. The deputy head of UNICEF, the UN Children's Agency, was on a trip to Gaza. They said this is still an extremely precarious situation with survival at the edge. We're talking about this post-ceasefire, but there hasn't really been a full ceasefire, and Palestinians are dying most days, although the world seems to have moved on and most of the world seems to have forgotten. So we are talking about what happens to the dead, but we mustn't forget that the numbers of dead still grow.
That's exactly right, James. I mean, the situation on the ground in Gaza is not one of a ceasefire. The Israeli regime continues to violate the ceasefire every single day. And that's one of the reasons why it is so difficult to recover those bodies from the rubble. We're talking about 68 million tons of rubble that is not just full of deceased bodies, but also incredibly hazardous materials that have been left over from bombs and from new types of weapons that the Israelis have been testing out on Palestinians in Gaza. And so that presents a lot of difficulty in retrieving bodies because there is limited equipment, especially specialist equipment that can deal with that kind of hazardous rubble safely. And in many cases, rescue teams are actually relying on very rudimentary tools, shovels and spades. And, we've seen images of people in Gaza trying to recover the bodies of family members with their bare hands. And this is, because the Israeli regime is not just restricting the entry of aid, which again is also in violation of the ceasefire agreement. It's also restricting recovery and reconstruction materials and machinery, and deliberately so. In the case of this latest Israeli hostage, more advanced machinery was permitted in order just to search for that body. On top of that, as you mentioned, James, the Israeli regime continues to bomb parts of Gaza, and so the genocide is still very much ongoing. And this is an active situation where the living are struggling to survive.
Amjad, let's pick up that point that we just heard there from Yara. The Israeli who was recovered, the remains were recovered from Gaza City, a massive Israeli operation. The Israeli army, the Shin Bet security agency were involved. I'm told they were exhuming hundreds of bodies. In fact, they had done DNA testing, apparently, on as many as 250 of them, and they had dental surgeons there. And then, having done all that, they found the one Israeli, and they, as I understand it, put everyone back, all the other bodies back into the mass grave. Contrast that effort with the lack of equipment, the lack of DNA equipment that you need to try and deal with the vast number of Palestinians buried under the rubble.
Just to tell you that this morning 4 people were killed while they are trying to reach the cemetery in order to check that if the bodies were reburied again in the same cemetery or not. So it's an inaccessible area, and it's very dangerous to reach. It's still under the Israeli control, the full area. So we have no idea about what happened with these bodies, about more than 200 bodies. Although in the cemetery itself, there is about 900 bodies there. And it's a new one. It's only established during the war in order, because we cannot reach the main cemetery east of Gaza City. So the people established this one. And already that, as I said, no access, and it's risky to reach. And this morning, only 4 people were killed while they are trying to reach this area to check. And we have concerns about the bodies who were there. And so many people, they were asking if the ICRC, if any international actor can help for coordination, for the Palestinian reconstruction, for the civil defense to reach it in order to check if these bodies will be reburied again in safe manner or not. But this is one of the cases. But also in the yards, every day almost, that we have found skulls and bones of different people were killed, children, women, in different areas. The problem that we cannot identify them. And in the same time, as you remember, everyone remembers that hospitals became big graves, collective graves areas for the families, for the patients, for the people who were locked inside the hospitals when it was invaded and bombarded. So still, every day we are getting more of these horrible things happening against the Palestinians. And we have also that we have the DNA test in order to we just put them for the future, and we give them again these numbers.
Okay, let me bring in Issam on what you're saying on the scale of the destruction. According to the UN, more than 80% of buildings and infrastructure destroyed. I met the head of UN Project Services earlier this month. He said to me it could take over 7 years to clear this rubble. That's the situation on the ground. Now, Issam, compare that with what we heard in Davos last week. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, glitzy real estate type presentation. He says Rafah could be rebuilt in 2 to 3 years. What do you make of that? I mean, what do you think Jared Kushner is going to do with the bodies of Palestinians, or are they just going to be bulldozed?
Unfortunately, Mr. Kushner and some other American politicians who are involved in this, including Mr. Witkoff, they are not neutral. They showed their bias. They don't look equally to the Palestinians and Israelis, and we also look in a skeptical way to concentrating people in Rafah near the Egyptian borders. And we don't know the detailed plans, because the land there in Rafah, it is private land for Palestinians in Rafah. When they want to bring people from all over Gaza to be deployed there, what will happen with the owners of this land, and what will happen for those of Rafah who are not in the city now, and it is unclear. It is vague, and we think that also it's not principled. We want the reconstruction of all Gaza, starting from removing the rubbles, and to make the whole Gaza Strip livable again, including the rehabilitation of the infrastructure, water resources, agricultural land. So it's not only just to find some prefabricated homes or few tents, even if it's thousands of tents. What about the educational system, the healthcare system, the infrastructure?
Can I bring in Yara? Yara, in terms of this, sorry, I'll come back to you, Issam, but Yara, in terms of the international community, particularly on the issue of the bodies of the dead, what should the international community, yes, we know the Americans are running the show, but for example, what should the UN do? In Syria, there was a UN mechanism. Okay, it was set up only 6 months before Assad fell, but it was an independent institution on missing persons in Syria. It doesn't sound like anyone is setting up anything in Gaza, and it doesn't sound like anyone's pushing for the equipment that's needed to come in.
Well, I mean, the UN is hanging on by a thread. There's been total international deference to President Trump and his colonial plans for Gaza, but also for the rest of the world. So I'm not sure it's worth thinking about what the UN should do in Palestine. I think very clearly, Palestine more than anywhere else is where international law has been proven to be inconsequential. And, I think taking us back to the American assessment of how long reconstruction will take, I think it's not really rooted in reality or any kind of expertise in Gaza or in Palestine. And it's not rooted in any concern for Palestinians and their future. They're looking at Gaza as a real estate opportunity. Kushner's presentation at Davos included Arabic script that was written the wrong way round. And I think that tells you all you need to know about Palestinian involvement in these plans. In other words, absolutely zero. And unfortunately, I think, wider international conversations, including at a UN level and at a European level, conversations around reconstruction have been devoid of talk of justice and accountability. And as your report said, Gaza is a mass grave, but it's also a massive crime scene. The worst of all crimes, genocide, was and continues to be committed in Gaza. And so, obviously Gaza is in need of immediate relief and reconstruction, but there also needs to be investigations that include collecting of evidence and, recording of massacres that took place. But on an international level, there's absolutely no discussion of this. And I think it's very clear that the world simply wants to find a way to repurpose rubble in Gaza, forget about all the martyrs and all the crimes committed in Gaza, and move on.
Amjad, if I can ask you about what has happened in the past, because we've got the bodies that are under the rubble in Gaza, But there are also bodies, Palestinian bodies, as you mentioned before, that are retained by Israel. Apparently this is something that goes back to the colonial times, the British colonial times of keeping bodies. Can you give me an idea how many bodies Israel is currently holding, either in unmarked graves or still refrigerated in mortuaries? And what are they trying to do? What do you think it's about? Is it trying to punish families?
It's part of the suffocation of the families and to live in their catastrophe conditions and their feelings, and to keep these people in such psychological trauma for a long time that these families who are waiting at least to bury their bodies, they are denied of this. And so the estimate is about 800 bodies still blocked by the Israelis. They are all during the 2 years of the Israeli attacks on the Palestinians. This is one of the estimates that we have, but the number could be more since we have no information about what's going on there. And there is still thousands who are missing. So it's no clear data that we have. Although that we reached the ICF.
Let me, just to add for completeness, of course, then we have prisoners who were released as part of these ceasefire deals. But just update us in your figures, and I know it's hard to compile these figures because Israel's not very open. How many prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, are still being held, Issam, in your estimation at the moment by Israel?
According to the Palestinian organizations working in prisoners' issues, it is estimated that 11,000 Palestinians are being held in Israeli detention. Still, there is no information about hundreds or maybe more than that. Has no information because some of the missing people whose families filed complaints and asked to look for their beloved ones, there is no data. The Israeli authorities did not recognize that they have them or they have any registry for them, and they didn't find their bodies. So still they are classified as disappeared people. That's why we want different actors, including ICRC, to step in and to resume its responsibility in dealing with this issue and allow to visit detention centers and prisoners and to meet them all and to document all the cases. And also we ask the special rapporteur on disappeared people in the UN also to resume his or her role in looking after the disappeared Palestinians and to reveal the fate of those who are missing. So it's a right for their families, for the Palestinian community. It is the right of people to mourn, to go on and to resume their daily lives.
A grim subject, but an important one. Thank you so much to our guests today, Amjad, Shawa, Yara, Hawari and Issam Aruri. Al Jazeera's teams in Gaza continue to provide comprehensive coverage, and you can find further context and analysis on our website, aljazeera.com. As ever, we want your views and comments too. Post them on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or use X, where we are at AJ Inside Story. From all the production team here in Doha and from me, James Bays, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.